Robby, what's on your radar today?
Well, there was some recent reporting on the incarceration of Ghislaine Maxwell, who viewers know was convicted of helping to facilitate sex trafficking and procured underage victims for Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Maxwell was sent to prison, but according to CNN, she has actually been transferred to a low-security prison in Tallahassee, Florida. Prison is still prison, of course, and I want to be clear that being incarcerated at all is very difficult, no matter the circumstances. There's a huge difference between low-security prisons, which often house white-collar criminals, people not involved in violent crime, or people who are understood to no longer be violent, and maximum security prisons. Inmates incarcerated in minimum security prisons have a lot more freedom to move about. They have more activities they can participate in. They probably have access to better restrooms and recreational areas. And obviously, they might have more comfortable bunks. And also, it should go without saying, when you're in minimum security prison, the other inmates are much less of a threat to your physical safety. There are fewer violent incidents in minimum security prison versus maximum security prison. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell is set to serve a 20-year sentence, and there's no question it's better for her, for anyone really, to be in a minimum rather than maximum security. According to the New York Post, the one she's headed to has movie night, it has yoga, it has much better conditions than her accommodations in New York, which mostly consisted of solitary confinement. Now, I don't relish consigning people, even very, very bad people, to suffering and misery, and so I don't really have a problem with Maxwell being sent to minimum security prison. But what about everybody else? What about, I don't know, Ross Ulbricht? Let's talk about Ross Ulbricht. In case you're unfamiliar with his case, Ross Ulbricht was the creator of Silk Road, a dark web marketplace. Silk Road used Tor for anonymity and Bitcoin for transactions, and it allowed people to buy, trade, and sell, well, anything, including illegal things, including drugs. Now, for creating this site, Ross Ulbricht got a double life sentence plus 40 years without the possibility of parole. The judge threw the book at him because he pleaded not guilty. He dared to defend himself against the idea that he was responsible for everything that transpired on Silk Road. Here's some footage of my colleagues at Reason Magazine, Zach Weissmuller, discussing the case.
At that fateful hearing in 2015, U.S. District Judge Catherine Forrest told the courtroom that she had decided to go well beyond the mandatory minimum of 10 years because Ulbricht had taken a philosophical stand against drug prohibition. The Silk Road's creator thought that he was better than the laws of this country. This is deeply troubling, terribly misguided, and very dangerous.
This is a brilliant young man who committed no violent crime and who will spend perhaps the rest of his life in strict prison confinement. Now, many libertarian-leaning political figures, including former Representatives Ron Paul and Justin Amash, as well as many principled civil libertarians on the left, including Noam Chomsky, have described what happened to Ulbricht as a travesty of justice. Ulbricht isn't a danger to anyone, but guess what? He has spent the last 5 years in high-security prison. He shouldn't be in prison at all. His sentence should be commuted along with anyone else currently incarcerated for non-violent drug crimes. And then what about, of course, Julian Assange? Assange is currently incarcerated at the notorious Belmarsh prison in London. He's been there since April of 2019. Belmarsh is a maximum security facility with appalling conditions for prisoners. Inside Belmarsh, Assange's health has deteriorated. His partner Stella Morse and his brother Gabriel Shipton have both documented for the media the miserable conditions he faces as he awaits possible extradition to the U.S. Assange's only crime was letting the people know true information that the government wanted hidden from us. That's it. Today's actually the 12th anniversary of the publication of the Afghan War Diaries. Here's some old footage of Assange explaining that.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
Julian Assange engaged in the honest work of journalism, of informing the people, and he suffered tremendously for it. There's no cushy jail with yoga and arts and crafts waiting for him if he's brought back to the United States. So I want to be very clear that prison is prison. Prison is horrible, even if it's the nicer prison, which now Ghislaine Maxwell is in. I don't know. Maybe that's called for. Maybe in their judgment, they determined that was the right place for her. But she was convicted of really, really horrific crimes of of helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually victimize underage women. And this is how she's going to spend the next 20 years of her life, or however long it ends up being, while people who should not be in prison at all.
Yeah.
Maximum security.
Yeah,
solitary confinement.
This is a great radar, Robby. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it is difficult to talk about these things when you're kind of broadly against our hyper ramped up mass incarceration system. To try to like pick winners and losers within that system, it's hard to, you want to avoid sounding like you're validating any part of it or kind of undermining how horrific it is, even in its best incarnations. And I really appreciate your sensitivity in trying to, thread that needle. But I think you're absolutely right. The disparities in sentencing, the disparities in where people get sentenced, not just the length of time that they spent in jail, has so much to do with your access to expensive attorneys versus public defenders. It has so much to do with the wealth you come into the criminal justice system with. Whether or not you spend your time pre-trial before you've been convicted of anything in a prison like Rikers, in a jail like Rikers, or on the street in your own home has everything to do with whether you can afford bail. And you see these inequities all over the place. And I think pointing out some of these high profile cases, the difference between people who have a lot of media attention, like Assange versus Ghislaine, shows you exactly what the incentives are, even among people who are famous or notorious.
And the punishment for people who dare to try to actually do what our system is set up to allow you to do, which you're supposed to be able to do, which is actually prove your innocence.
Yeah.
If you have the audacity not to accept a plea deal where you have to admit your guilt and then maybe your sentence isn't so bad, if you say, no, I deserve a trial and I don't think I'm guilty, you get destroyed for that. It's the worst decision you could ever make.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book right now in preparation for an interview by Michael Thrasher, who has written about the viral underclass, the history of the COVID virus and the HIV virus and other kind of viruses and how we've responded to it as a country. And he profiles this famous defendant who was charged with knowingly spreading HIV. He was a college kid. There's some dispute about how knowing it was, et cetera. But he was offered a plea deal of 10 years. He says, no, this isn't fair. I'm going to fight it. And ends up being put, I think, could have been consecutive 30-year terms. I think that he could serve them consecutively. So he's in there for 30 years. He'll get out in his 50s, right? For doing something that people who murder folks, people who actually commit murder get shorter times than he did for something that's obviously bad, but not commensurate with what the charge is. And it had everything to do with him having a public defender who was just not up to the task. But public defenders are underfunded. It's not about their personal feelings, obviously, but we just don't put money into the systems we have to protect the most vulnerable in this country. On top of which, we have a criminal justice system that is punitive when politically people get on the wrong side of the aisle. And it's disgusting that, facilitating the rape of minors doesn't get you the same kind of punitive attention that doing journalism does.
And I'm not naive. I'm not a prison abolitionist. I think the conditions in all prisons should be generally improved because we don't sentence people to be tortured, but there are dangerous individuals out there who need to be locked away. Maybe they're a danger even to other people in the prison. Fine, I concede that these circumstances exist, but that's not look at the individuals who are put through these procedures are so often not violent or not violent anymore or never were violent. So it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you for that, Robby, and we'll have more Rising for you right after this.